The Star Wars fanbase is waiting with bated breath for Episode 3 of The Acolyte, the one where we have been promised that Star Wars is about to be ruined forever. Meanwhile, the defenders are bracing themselves for the outrage, and setting up the narrative that if anyone is at fault here, it is you, the fans. One Kathleen Kennedy apologist said on X, "Tonight's episode of The Acolyte will excite the Star Wars fanbase in a way few things have in recent memory, I think." If he by excite means in the chemical sense where energy is increasing, often triggering an explosive reaction, then yeah, he's probably right. But beyond that, the only ones excited here are activists who couldn't care less about Star Wars, beyond as a means to further their ideology. They are excited about the hurt incurred on actual fans. Case in point, he continues. It's also going to make the piss babies whine and cry and piss their pants live on their YouTube streams. It's going to be a wild night, y'all. That's activist for that the ones with the voice to do so and who speak for the majority of fans will be holding Disney, Bob Iger, Kathleen Kennedy and Leslie Headland accountable, and that is exactly right. It is indeed gonna be wild, but why wait? The defenders have already put up their preemptive attacks on the fans out there, so let's warm up with that. If the best defense is a good offense, then Inverse wrote one of the most offensive articles yet, addressing the fans directly, titled, "The Acolyte isn't ruining Star Wars, you are." Get ready for some major projecting and gaslighting here, for the article reads, "No one hates Star Wars more than those who claim to be Star Wars fans." Does Kathleen Kennedy and her Force is Female crew claim to be Star Wars fans? I wonder, because if they do, then this claim is true, but sadly, that's not whom Inverse has in mind. Sure, the past few years have given the fandom plenty to critique. The sequels splintered the fanbase beyond recognition. It's funny how it is now self-evident that The Last Jedi split the fanbase, because I remember when that movie was the best thing since sliced bread, and outlets like Inverse were adamant everyone loved the movie, apart from Russian hackers who were doing some interference, allegedly. How the narrative has changed on that one. The article continues, and Lucasfilm's efforts to expand the galaxy on the small screen have been mixed at best. And in some cases, criticism is inevitable. Not everyone will find something to like in the franchise's recent output. At a certain point though, the discourse reaches a fever pitch, and even Lucasfilm's most promising projects get swept up in the drama. They have no promising projects. Not one. Unless Inverse is referring to The Acolyte, the Star Wars Pride special that fans have actively not wanted since the day it was announced. Moving on, The Acolyte is not the first Star Wars project to face the brunt of fan backlash, and it likely won't be the last. But the new live-action series is also one of the best additions to that galaxy far away in a long time, embracing decades of nostalgia. How? Where is the nostalgia play here? Some throwaway lines? Because that doesn't count. But it gets worse, because the next sentence is, while also thinking critically on the franchise's legacy. I think they must mean thinking ideologically and subversively, because there is no evidence of any critical thinking here in anything we have seen so far, not on screen and not among the creatives who brought us this in the first place. It also might be the most diverse Star Wars story yet, and while that's definitely a boon for marginalized fans, it's made The Acolyte the target of a vocal splinter of the fandom. No, there is no demand for this anywhere in the fandom. The only ones calling for this are activists outside of it. The fan base is pretty unified against The Acolyte. But now, we get to the point where Inverse decides it's time to call out the enemy, namely people like us. Whether you know them as the fandom menace or a cluster of blue checkmark users on Twitter, it's impossible to escape their orbit. Well, that would be because we speak for the fans and for the integrity of the property, and we wouldn't have to do that if rags like Inverse had done that instead. But since they have chosen to run the errand of the elite and the establishment to the detriment of fans and the properties themselves, here we are. So, let's see what more falsehoods they have to say. The same folks that review-bombed diverse swings like Marvel's Eternals and the Lord of the Rings prequel The Rings of Power have now set their sights on the Acolyte. No, we were quite truthful in our reviews. Both the Eternals and the Rings of Power are hated by the audience at large. The only ones who review-bombed anything were outlets like these, that tried to deceive viewers by giving these garbage productions fake positive reviews. There is a reason why the viewers are with the likes of us, while the only way an article like this gets any traction at all is because we deign to cover it. It continues though. To hear them tell it, the series is the worst thing that's ever happened to Star Wars, and its showrunner, Leslie Headland, is just as fiendish as Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy. To them, the Acolyte's woke agenda is something to be feared. It's ruining Star Wars, it's poisoning pop culture itself. This is phrased to mock us, but in a sense, everything said here is true, and as a result of that, Star Wars itself is a zombie brand at this point. The more rating numbers that come out, the worse it gets, and as we covered in our most recent video, not even pirates are downloading this, not in the numbers you'd expect at any rate. The Acolyte isn't even worth stealing. But keep in mind, while this article may be written about us, it is not written for us. Instead, it is written for the activists who don't give two shits about Star Wars, who are just in it for the DEI, and that is made clear right here. We realize how ridiculous that all sounds, right? God, I hope so. Yeah, well, keep on hoping. But if not, let's try this. The Acolyte is not actually ruining Star Wars, but the bigoted backlash is definitely ruining the fun for everyone else. Pray tell, what everyone else would that be? Your charter of Antifa? Because by all available metrics, this is the least watched live-action Star Wars ever. I mean, as Valiant Renegade broke down, so far the Acolyte has 1/10 of the audience worldwide as the House of the Dragon has in the US alone. But the gaslighting continues. Jumping forward a bit. The problem is that nothing has changed. In the 10 years since this vocal minority suddenly cried out against diverse casting and more nuanced storytelling, they've yet to actually learn their lesson. First of all, we are not a vocal minority. We have a platform, and a big one, because we speak for the silent majority. Vocal minority? Well, that would be the likes of Inverse. Secondly, something has changed. Namely, that Star Wars used to be the biggest entertainment brand on the planet, while now it's just another generic sci-fi brand. Star Wars went from $1 billion brand to $1 million brand, and it did so because Kathleen Kennedy's Lucasfilm didn't learn their lesson. Respect the integrity of the source material or see the fans flee, and take their disposable earnings that otherwise would have been spent on Star Wars with them. And that's exactly what has happened. That's the only lesson to take away here. We were right since day one, while Inverse and their ilk has always been on the wrong side of this issue. They kind of make that argument themselves, saying about us. Their arguments are bleeding into even the casual discourse surrounding the Acolyte. Yeah, wanna know why? Because we are right. And we speak for the audience, while Inverse are on the wrong side of history, and they're losing right now. That desperation comes through towards the very end. The Acolyte can weather the storm. After all, it's been well received by critics. No it can't, commie. No it can't. Both the aforementioned Rings of Power and the Eternals were also received well by critics who were out of touch with the audience. Didn't help them much, did it? But what about the fandom and its relationship to those guiding the franchise now? As the discourse spirals out of control, it's getting harder to ignore it outright. There's no easy way out, but something has to change. Otherwise, this vocal minority will end up ruining Star Wars for the rest of us. No, Inverse. It's activist minorities like you who ruin Star Wars for the majority of fans, which is clearly borne out by the numbers. Because of the likes of you, the Star Wars brand is irreparably damaged, and it can never return to what it once was. That ship has sailed. Still, this article alone suggests that our speaking truth to authority is working. The only question now is if Kathleen Kennedy will continue her destruction to the delight of the likes of Inverse, or if some adults at some point will take charge of Disney and try to, at the very least, mitigate the damage that has been done, and continues to be done by the Acolyte. And whatever happens, we'll be here to cover it. Next up, the attack of the lesbian space witches in episode 3. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments.